When it comes to the health of card games, you would be surprised at how important secondary market values turn out to be. Greetings, owners of fine luxury cardboard rectangles. The situation that's been going on recently with Force of Will has, and I don't mean the card, I mean the card game, has sent my mind down a path thinking about secondary markets and the importance of them for different card games, right? Now, this is something that didn't really matter as much for Magic the Gathering because Magic the Gathering was the one that sort of paved the way for this. And Magic the Gathering, when it started at least, felt like it had the most organic, I guess is the way to put it, secondary market. And that's the best kind of secondary market to have because that's purely a relative measure of the health of a game, right? The way that secondary markets are supposed to work, to make sure we're all on the same page, the ideal secondary market works like this. There is literally no interference from the company whatsoever, and the company doesn't pay attention to the secondary market. They make the product, we consume the product, and then we as a group determine the value of the individual pieces, right? And that was done in a more kind of wide and loose way when Magic the Gathering started, right? You didn't have uniform prices across the board for all these cards. You had relative values. You know what I mean? You'd be like, okay, this card is clearly better than this card. But in terms of more set, fixed monetary values, that was hard to come by because stores would individually price out those cards. People would have their own idiosyncrasies that would cause them to value cards in different ways. And things weren't as hard set as they are now, where if you want to know the price of new Magic cards, for example, or whatever, or old Magic cards, there are all kinds of factors you can use. You can go to any number of different websites, one of them being something like TCG Player, for example. And since I'm bringing it up, I have a TCG Player link in my description. If you like to buy cards online, feel free to use it, and I get the hookup too. So, you can look at sites like that and get a generalized idea. Some people like to look at eBay closing sales, whatever it is. You're getting market data based on prices that are roughly what people are willing to pay. A seller goes, this card is worth 50 cents. And the buyer goes, you're right, that is worth 50 cents. And they buy the card. And that's fine, right? And that's the way that it works with the healthiest of games have mostly normal secondary markets. Let's be real. Especially with what's going on in the last year or so with like secret layers and stuff like that, we've got a scenario where Wizards is definitely paying more attention to the secondary market. Like they'll never legally admit that they see the secondary market, but they're literally picking cards from the secondary market and selling us those cards at close to secondary market price. So you know that's what's going on, right? But my thoughts about the secondary market were more about how they help to indicate the health of a game. Now, we know Magic's healthy, and the secondary market isn't a great way to tell the health of that game. It's better for games that are like coming up. These new games that aren't as big, right? Because the secondary market really helps in that regard. The bigger your market is, obviously, the less tumultuous that market is. So Force of Will, for example, a few years ago, had a much better secondary market. Like when I got into the game, I guess maybe that would be 3 or 4 years now. I can't remember exactly, but the game had a much more robust economy, right? People were willing to like buy and sell cards with far more ease. And for example, big shops up in Toronto, if you're not aware, Toronto is a major metropolitan city in Canada that has like millions of people living there, right? So there were game shops in Toronto that would purchase Force of Will cards from you. That is that's one of the aspects of a secondary market that really shows you the strength of a game. Are stores willing to take the cards from you? Obviously, when a store stops selling singles altogether for a game, you know that game is in dire straits. But before that happens, you will notice decreasing prices on the buy list, even though it feels like the prices haven't moved on the secondary market. All of a sudden, you see these prices dropping on what they'll pay for buy listing, right? And then they slowly start to drop the price of the singles, and it just kind of torpedoes all the way down to the bottom. And then the game bottoms out. I don't know how much attention you guys pay to like these little games that pop up, and it doesn't necessarily just apply to card games, obviously, but that's the wheelhouse that I'm talking within. If you want to go half card games, there was that Star Wars game that they made in the last couple of years with the big chunky dice. You roll them and you got a little card that goes with it. So it's like a card and dice game. And that game blew up, right? It was huge. Certain cards from it were like, oh, wow, I got like, I can't even remember the specific cards, right? But there were particular ones. The super rares were like the purples or whatever, but you get them. And some of those sold for a nice chunk of change. And there was a number of months where these were huge, right? And then slowly but surely, you see it ticking downwards. And then just one day, buy list is gone, right? There's no more buy list there. You start to look around. There's no buy list here. There's no buy list there. That's what you're seeing with Force of Will. You'll see people in the Force of Will marketplace group going like, are there any places that do buy lists or anything? It seems like nobody wants to take the cards because there's no value to them, right? So you've got a situation where games, like to me, I think the best way to do things personally is to just create a good game. Make a good game and people will play it. Magic the Gathering didn't take into account the secondary market when it was created. In fact, I guarantee pretty much Richard Garfield couldn't have even conceived of Magic becoming what it was. He thought it would just be like any other game you have sitting around on your shelf that you pick up to play here or there. He had no idea he had captured lightning in a bottle, but he has. And when you get that lightning in a bottle, you literally get to print money. That's what Magic the Gathering is. Make no bones about it, right? It's legit a license to print money. They get to design the cards, send them out, determine how frequently they come out, how you can obtain them. There's all these different tricks that can be used to keep the secondary market value high. And you can do that when you're an established player. But I think if you pay attention to the secondary market right when you start and try and aim at things and go, you know what, I'm looking at Magic's secondary market and here's how we're going to approach it. To me, that's putting the the cart before the horse. That's the saying, right? You got everything all mixed up. You're not doing things in the right order, right? So you're basically putting your shoes on and then your socks, and that makes you look silly. So trying to pay attention to a secondary market and like grab onto that, it smacks of greed. And the problem is you don't know where the right line is for it. I think the best example of secondary market stupidity would actually be a computer game, surprisingly enough. It sounds a little bit weird, but trust me, it fits. We've got the game Artifact, which you guys may or may not have heard of for one of two reasons. Either you may have heard of it because of the game, or you may have heard of the hilarious Artifact situation that happened on Twitch. It was an amazing weekend or something like that. It was like 2 days where abruptly out of nowhere, people decided to go onto Twitch and stream under the Artifact game category. But oh man, some of the stuff they're streaming, I can't even mention in the videos or YouTube's going to get angry at me. But the stuff that they did was amazing. It was just, what's going on here? But the Artifact card game was meant to be like a Magic the Gathering style game. In fact, Valve, the people at Valve, these are the guys who make like some amazing games in the past and run Steam or whatever. They're responsible for the creation of the Artifact game, but they did it in conjunction with Richard Garfield. So they got the guy who designed Magic to design Artifact. It's a digital card game. It's beautiful. Visually, oh lordy, is it beautiful. And interestingly enough, it's like playing Magic with 3 different battlefields that you shift between, but you have one hand. Like, the concept for the game is really, really cool. But the problem is, Artifact came out stating, like just stating that they were going to have a strong secondary market and that the cards they made would always be worth money. These kind of proclamations that you literally can't make. And they even, if I understand things correctly, even went so far as to have buyback programs to remove some cards out of the pool in an attempt to keep the values high. But the problem is, like, you had to pay to do everything in that game. Like, there was no free ass. It was like money. Like, you have to keep feeding them money. So they basically wanted to act like they had the prestige and secondary market muscle of a card game that had been around for decades, which is insanity. You can't do that. It's not, no one's going to go for that. So Artifact collapsed, and they've come back now, and they still have the cool same gameplay, still visually beautiful, but They've changed it to a far more friendly model where you can buy things from them, but there's ways to get whatever, and they're not sitting there like going, we're definitely going to have an expensive secondary market. Like, to me, a game that comes out right away talking about the secondary market, that indicates, like, I get it. On one hand, you wanna say to people, we're gonna have a strong secondary market, because a weak secondary market is really bad for your game, because it's the most evident and undeniable proof of your failure. Do you know what I mean? Like, if there's like, let's say your card game is putting out new sets, and your new cards, like all the best rares from your new sets, are worth 10 or 20 bucks each. By the way, that's great for a new game. If you're putting out new sets and people are valuing individual cards from that set at 10, 20 bucks a piece, and it's not just the one chase rare, but like regular level rares or whatever, you're doing a good job. That is a great start, because you're showing that people value what you have, but we're not dealing with absurd, out of this world numbers. You can't jump to Magic the Gathering top end secondary market prices. That's not real, and everybody will know it. Looking at the secondary market is where you see the truth of a game. So I watched it happen with Force of Will. People were willing to buy. I cracked like an Uber rare or whatever, and it was worth $100. And I was just like, that's what they said. It's $100. I'm like, who wants to give me 80 bucks for this? You know what I mean? And somebody instantly took that, right? And a couple of weeks ago, tried to sell off some of the Force of Will I have now, and it's like, I want this super amazing, awesome card here. It's worth $1. I'll give you $1 for it. And it's like, wasn't that like 30 bucks, 40 bucks? Like, whatever it was, like, I thought, oh, that's a good card. Oh, it's worth $1. I want this super awesome foil rare too. It's worth 14 cents. And it's like, oh, yikes, your best cards. The prices have just all the way down, right? And when you see that, like, where are you going to go with that information? There are people who got upset at my last video where I said that Force of Will was collapsing and the game was done for. And I stand by that. If you don't like that news, sorry. The good news is you can still play the game. Just because a game is collapsing doesn't mean you can't enjoy it. A dead game doesn't mean literally 0 people play this. Some people get all caught up on that. It's not a dead game, I still play it. Look, man, if nobody's running out to buy the new stuff, and the customer base is shrinking and not growing, the market values are shrinking and not growing, that is a dead card game, right? Like, you're at some stage in that process. The atrophy is real. Technically, could a game like de-zombify and come back? Maybe. Chances are really low, though. I can't think of a single game that really has experienced that level. Like, once the game shops and stuff stop having buy lists, and I mean everywhere, you can't go online and find a buy list to sell this stuff to anybody. That sends a very, very strong signal. If you can't dump your cards for even 5% of what they're worth, then they're worth 0 to you. Do you know what I mean? Like, monetarily. You may still want to play with them, but monetarily. And the more that mindset spreads, the fewer people are going to look at that game and go, why would I go and pay full price for this product? Buy these booster packs at $5 or $6 a piece when I'm going to get 14 cents out of them, when there are other card games that I can just go and play and I'm not going to get value hosed the same way, right? So the secondary market is a huge, huge indicator of when things are going on. I feel this is a massive topic that I could create a much larger and more sprawling video about, but I just wanted to talk about how interesting it is that this can be used to determine things, and how you need to be leery about any game that comes along and starts talking right away about how they're going to have strong secondary market values or touting their secondary market values, because a game needs to be established for a certain amount of time, right? To even have any kind of value. And even after that point, maintaining that position, not having that value erode, is incredibly difficult to do. There's only so much money that will move around in these different card games. So you will have new contenders show up like Flesh and Blood, which I've heard a number of people bring up and say, oh, this is a fun game. Are you getting into it? Are you going to? And the honest answer is no. I'm not going to get into Flesh and Blood, at least not with my own money. If somebody sends me some Flesh and Blood cards, I'll totally check it out like I do with other games I've been sent. But I look at Flesh and Blood personally and see it, like, it seems to me like they're trying to hype this, like, hey, buy our alpha boxes. We studied Magic the Gathering and what they did at the beginning, and we're gonna, like, our stuff is gonna have value, and we're doing such and such. And whenever a game comes out and is like, we've studied this aspect of how the game started, and we're emulating an attempt to create value. My position is create a game that is of value. Don't create a game in an attempt to create value. The value should be the game. Let us determine the value through how much we enjoy the game, how much we're willing to pay for these individual game pieces. When the company is trying to set the secondary market values, especially from the get-go, that is like, it's the difference between fiat currency and gold-backed. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you understand that, it's fairly evident where it's like, money's worth it because the government says so, or money's worth it because you get a chunk of gold in exchange for this piece of paper. There's a huge difference between the two. So I just wanted to bring this up, right? If you like Flesh and Blood, I'm not knocking the game. I don't know anything about the gameplay. I just know that from what I've heard about it and the first information that's being pushed forward to me, and it's all about finances and how I've got a box of the alpha run it. It's great if it's going up in value right now, but don't delude yourself into thinking you're sitting on another product like Magic. It's not logical. Do you know what I mean? Like, there's nothing here to say that decades from now, this game's still gonna be around. To me, buying boxes of these games feels like playing the greater fool theory, where it's just like, I'm going to buy this and hope someone's dumb enough to pay more than I did. Not based on genuine value or worth, but based on perception, right? Because perception helps to form reality. Either way, I do feel like this is a massive subject, and I know this one is going to elicit a lot of comments from you guys. You're gonna have your own thoughts to share. So I wanna hear them. Share them in the comments below. If you like what I'm doing here, like, comment, subscribe. It's all great for the channel. Feel free to get yourself some nice, delicious merchandise linked below as well. Other than that, thanks for coming by, my friends. Enjoy all the lovely Patreon names scrolling by. I will have a link up to a ridiculous video that I just put out today on another channel. You should go and watch it. I guarantee you it will make you laugh. You want to pick me up for your day? You watch this video, you'll have a good time.